Someone says their father-in-law would love the intro. Well, it's available. I make all the music on this. Good evening, everyone. I'm your host, Jason Miles, here for another episode of This is Revolution podcast. If new to the channel, welcome. Glad to have you here. If you like what we're doing, please hit like and subscribe. It is a passive gesture that goes a long way. If you are a returning listener, subscriber, or one of our very valued patrons, so glad to have you back. A quick reminder that we will be watching movies this week on TIR. On Thursday, after JG and I discuss the Sleepaway Camp movies, we'll be watching Sleepaway Camp 2. Also, thank you to Forrest, Conan, and the Movie Night Extravaganza guys for having me on the show to discuss Star Wars, episode 4, the original. That episode is up right now, so make sure to check that out. If you'd like to join us for movie night watch parties, or like where we're going tonight after this show, the Champagne Room Shenanigans, there's one easy way: become a patron or a paid YouTube subscriber. You'll get access to the Champagne Room, join us for movie night, and as a patron, if you can't make it, you'll get to watch the movie night replay filled with all of the in-movie banter of the TIR family. By becoming a paid YouTube subscriber or patron, you can make sure TIR can continue to stay on the air, producing irreverent, intelligent, and insane programming like this. But that's not why you're here. You guys are here to talk about sociocide. I'm sure you guys are like, what the fuck is sociocide, Jason? Well, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. Recently on TIR, we watched the film Death Wish 4, The Crackdown. In the movie, Charles Bronson plays a mild-mannered architect who takes on not one, not two, but 3 criminal enterprises and a corrupt police force, all in the name of vengeance. Bronson's character infiltrates these organizations because he blames his girlfriend's daughter's death from a massive crack overdose, not on the systemic causes, but on drugs in the abstract. For Bronson, there are no material or social conditions that lead someone to use drugs, only the fact that drugs exist and the people who deal them are a cancer to society. Bronson sees himself as the chemotherapy meant to eradicate that cancer from the body politic, even if it means having a gunfight with a grenade launcher in a crowded roller skating rink. Bronson's revenge fantasies, alongside films like the original Mad Max and RoboCop, present a world where criminals have more rights than law-abiding citizens, and where drug abuse or gang violence are stripped of their socioeconomic roots. In RoboCop, however, there is at least some rationale for the societal breakdown. The police department is being taken over by a private corporation, officers are about to lose their pensions, and a mega corporation, Omnicorp, plans to replace human officers with robots. When the first robot prototype, Ed 209, malfunctions and kills an executive during a boardroom demo, a rising executive proposes the Cyborg Project, implanting a human brain into a robotic body to create a more obedient police force. In RoboCop, there are no good guys. The titular character doesn't protect and serve as much as eliminates targets. While his human memories allow him to distinguish between street criminals and corporate executives, he still serves his corporate masters, not the public. As the sequels progress, the city never improves. Instead, the corporations behind RoboCop gain total control. The message is clear. The destruction of social bonds, industry, and jobs creates a destitute populace that supposedly needs authoritarian figures like RoboCop, Bronson, or the cyborg teacher assassins in the movie Class of 1999. Sociocide, the destruction of the social fabric, has taken place. In this worldview, only authoritarian fascistic measures can restore order. From our guest's upcoming book, quote, sociocide is the social breeding ground of what political scientists have called policide, now a looming threat in the U.S. Policide is the end of politics as bargaining partisan politics and democracy itself, emerging when sociocide breaks apart the social bonds and trust essential to compromise, consensus, and the acceptance of democratic governance. It is ruled by force, typically by a strongman whose coercion and iron fists become the primary instruments for assuring stability and order. As societies become sociocidal, people hunger for the community authoritarian political leaders offer. The strength of that hunger was reflected in the 2024 victory of Donald Trump for a second term. Strongmen, such as Donald Trump, seek to break down all social associations they do not control. They promise to reconnect people in the community of, quote, true patriots, united to purge those poisoning the blood of the nation. This is the heart of fascism. The triumphant rise of Trumpism and far-right populism is the clearest sign of America's growing crisis of sociocide, corporate oligarchy, and neo-fascist policide, unquote. That was an excerpt from BONFIRE, American Sociocide, Broken Relations, and the Quest for Democracy by our guest, returning guest. Please welcome Professor Charles Derber. How was that?
Jason, fabulous. I was thinking, that sounds an awful lot like my book. The only thing is you mentioned it was forthcoming. I just want to repeat again, if people can see it, I don't know. But the book is out. It's called BONFIRE, American Sociocide, Broken Relations, and the Quest for Democracy. And you summarized it brilliantly. I guess I just want to add that, you know, when you hear the word sociocide, I think people think suicide. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of a concept, other people have used it. I'm using it with the idea that it's not only individuals who commit suicide, societies can essentially commit suicide. And I think we're going through a process like that. Just to give you a little bit of, information and data that makes this very real. Jason, the average American, how many of them eat all their meals alone, would you guess?
Oof. A percentage or a number?
Percentage.
A percentage?
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was over 50.
You're right. I mean, I've seen a large variety. I've seen often the figure 68%, that about 2/3 of Americans eat all their meals alone. The number of people saying they have fewer good friends, often 0 to 2, has gone up. This is just over the last 10 years or so, pretty much right before the Trump era. The number of people who are getting married and staying married, relationships are in trouble. They're under a lot of stress for some of the reasons you brilliantly talked about at the beginning. They're under a lot of economic stress. It's very hard for people to feel that they are secure. As I'm sure you know, about 62%, Bernie Sanders uses this argument a lot, say that they live paycheck by paycheck. People are in deep doo-doo, they're really in a lot of trouble. And that translates into people feeling afraid. It's why, do you know, Jason, who is the biggest demographic who buys guns in the United States today?
Women?
You're right. You're absolutely right. And they're buying it for their children. They're now, the gun industry is fashioning guns for, 2 or 3 year old kids. Great gift. But, why are women buying? And these are not just working class women, they're women of all income. They're scared. When society is kind of breaking apart, I mean, you sort of hinted at this, Jason, in your intro, which was really a great intro. The employment relation. Marx argued that, a job in a capitalist society is a ripoff. The big corporations are going to steal your labor, and that's true. But Marx also said it created a relationship, and before capitalism, people worked in farms or scattered out. And one thing Marx thought was potentially hopeful about capitalism was it brought people into a common space. So workers could get to know each other more. You're talking about the socialization of the state of the space of production. And he thought that would lead to unions and to, revolutionary parties and so forth, which it has during imperial parts of years. But now the very big guys in the corporate world are breaking apart, the workplace. They're using, AI and, about, what is it now? About 30% of workforce is now working in remote settings. Of course, AI is going to replace a very significant number of people altogether, so they won't have any relation to an employer or to other workers. Our friends Trump and Musk and the top Jeff Bezos, they're suing to make unions unconstitutional. What is a union? It's a way of kind of creating a community around common interests in the workplace, some sort of class consciousness. This is all being wiped out by the oligarchies that are running the country right now. And Trump has joined, of course, this savage attack on employment and on unions and so forth. And it's happening with all kinds of other things, like around Silicon Valley and the whole replacement of face-to-face relations with, I don't know how many people who listen to you. I mean, what would you guess, Jason, what percentage of your viewers spend more than 3 or 4 hours on the screen a day? On social media.
I would say probably 99% of the people.
Yeah. That's what I find among my students. And my students also tell me, these are college students, they say they don't trust the social media. They don't know who the influences are. They don't know, they feel they're being manipulated, but they're being kind of seduced into, because it's so easy a way. And it's contradictory. You can make certain kinds of connections online. But the studies have shown, there's a famous book out called Alone Together, and also Surveillance Capitalism.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know these books. And, so what I'm doing in this book on BONFIRE is looking at all the forces, and again, you beautifully captured it in your intro, that are kind of breaking the relationships that sort of hold society together apart. And that, as you said, de Tocqueville, when this French guy who came to America and said, well, maybe it has a democratic possibility, he was impressed by all the civic associations, that people went to church together, they went to, they had all kinds of civic meetings, and he thought that would blossom toward a democracy. It would create the kind of trust and social cohesion that make democracy possible. Hannah Arendt, the philosopher who came out of Germany, she said, you may know this, Jason, but many of you do not. She said the biggest cause of Hitler's fascism in Germany was, of course, the Depression, but also loneliness. She said workers were being spun out and they lacked kind of solid relationships with people around you. And when you don't feel safe and you're buying guns because you don't have strong solidarity at work, your family situation feels insecure, you're eating alone, you don't have a lot of friends you trust, you feel afraid, and you don't trust other people. And this is, absolute wonderful breeding ground for fascism, as you say, for authoritarianism. Because
do you think, and I know you're back east and I'm over here on the West Coast, and I'm, to add, I don't want to say insult to injury, but I'm also in Mexico, which is a little bit different. But I've always been the type of person, I think because I grew up with my grandparents, to talk to everybody. And I learned at a very young age that the world is a much nicer place if you're a nicer person. So that's how I try to behave. And there's something to be said about that. I mean, I do hang out at night.
You come across that way. I can tell it. I'm sort of the same way. I kind of trust people and I like them.
Yeah.
I mean, just like when I start talking to you and listening to you, I was reminded of our previous interaction. And I do it in, I open the door for students and I like these small interactions that help build a sense of connection to other people. But it ain't happening very well in the larger society. And I just want to mention one thing. I don't know if you know this concept, Jason, you probably do, but a French social theorist named Pierre Bourdieu wrote a book about what he called social capital. And he said, everybody who studies capitalism understands that capital is money. And if you don't have a lot of money and capital, you're in trouble in capitalism. Well, what Bourdieu talks about when he talks about social capital is the amount of sort of capacity and power that arises from being connected to people in the way that you like to connect people and I like to connect to people. In other words, as you build sort of a sense of trust and enjoyment and solidarity with people that you meet, there's this whole now theory that that social capital is not only indispensable to individual functioning, actually having a lot of social capital is a really important protection against suicide, but it's also a really important protection against authoritarianism. And so let me just tell you one thing. If you had to guess, Jason, which part of the American population would you guess has the lowest social capital? In other words, reports the least amount. And I'm talking primarily when I say which part, from an economic point of view.
Economic standpoint,
Yeah.
I would say probably the poor, because they're always working. As a poor person that's always working, I'm always working.
Well, you're right. It's sort of low-income working class people. Yeah. I mean, there's kind of a mythology that traditional working class people, because they go to church maybe more often, that it's more the elite upper middle class who's more individualistic and more so. But as I was doing some research on this book, one of the things I learned, although I've written a lot about American individualism and people sort of be feeling isolated. I mean, individualism and capitalism says, you're on your own, everybody's competing for themselves, it's sink or swim. It's not surprising that capitalism breeds individualism and kind of a sense of isolation and competitiveness and, not trusting other people. But social capital tends to be low in general in American capitalism, but it's particularly low in the Trump base. In other words, when you look at the people who are in the MAGA base, particularly the working class and low income people who tend to vote for Trump, it's really striking how low their social capital is from various surveys, which surprised me. I didn't know that, but it really did help confirm the idea that if relationships are very tenuous and kind of hostile and people are feeling insecure and isolated and scared, and, they get attracted. A lot of the people who went to Trump rallies, they went to Trump rallies all over the country, and they got to know each other, and a kind of community built.
Yes.
There's a lot of writing about this journalistically, and actually books about, the guys who go and they get the women who go, and they get to know each other, and they develop this sense of knowing each other and being connected to each other and loving Trump, feeling that Trump is going to be their voice.
He's the bond.
Because just for all the reasons you said in your intro, that he's saying he's going to fix the economy and he's going to protect you from all these immigrants and criminals and all these, this is, of course, as you said, the heart of fascism, saying there's all these enemies within. Sometimes they're outside as well, but fascism really focuses on the enemies within, and said, I'm going to protect you, put the power in me, and I will use that power because you're the true patriots of the country. And all these other people, whether they're immigrants, brown people, this is racially coded stuff, but this is how fascism really works. Remember, Hitler said he's protecting the Aryan German against, Slavs, Jews, Gypsies. And you probably know this, Jason, but Hitler was fascinated by Jim Crow and by the American racial system and the racial laws. When he was in jail in Mein Kampf, he wrote about this a lot, his famous book. And then as he got into Nazi politics in the 1920s in Germany, he told his scientists, they've got to go to the United States and study how American race laws, Jim Crow code and so forth worked. And, that's sort of a telling story about the relation between American history and fascism. Fascism began very early. I write about in this book, BONFIRE, SOCIOCIDE, about the beginning of American fascism in the beginning of the country. The Confederacy and the founders of the country were, there's a lot of misunderstanding about the Constitution, about the earliest founding of the country. These guys the Constitution was not ever designed to be anything remotely like a rule of the people or democracy. Jefferson and Madison were emulating, these were slaveholders, of course. They never, ever imagined that Black people would ever be able to mix with white. Even when Jefferson was much older, in the 1820s and 30s, he wrote that even if the slaves were freed, they should be sent back to Africa because they could never mix with the whites. And there was just this kind of fascist, he wrote eloquent words, Madison and Jefferson and so forth, about rule by the people. But if you look at the actual way, the Constitution was written based on the Magna Carta, which was a British, I'm sure you know, written in 1215. And it was not a document to get the British people to rule. They wanted to limit the monarch a little bit, just so that the nobles, the Magna Carta was a document called the Article of the Nobles, and the barons, actually, that was the term they used. And barons were any part of the royal class that were not who were not the kings themselves, and they wanted to keep their power and property, and so they created an oligarchy. And the American Magna Carta which was the Constitution, was never, ever, ever designed to be a rule by the people. These guys were envisaging a country that would look exactly like it did. I mean, in a way, the British Parliament was more democratic than what was emerging in America. I mean, Washington, Jefferson, Madison, these were the biggest slaveholders. They had the funny names. They ruled America before the Revolution, and they ruled America after the Revolution.
Can I ask you this question then?
Yes.
Why then are these people held in such a high regard on a bipartisan level, right? The right holds these men in an extremely high regard with things like the 1776 Project.
Right.
And also, to a certain degree, liberals hold these kind of liberal values of liberal democracy in an extremely high regard. And the Constitution, again, on a bipartisan level, which is what, like a page and a half?
Well, we have what you call bipartisan. I say we have two parties, Bush and Bush Light. This is private property.
Yeah.
So, these are both corporate parties. You know this well. And, back when the country was founded, you basically had a couple of parties. One was basically the Southern Plantation Party, which is really a kind of a proto-fascist or a very early form of American fascism. And again, I don't mean the term in a very loose way, just like a bad country or bad system or a racist one. It really has the elements of fascism, concentrating power in a very small number of persons. And, the Constitution gives the president enormous emergency powers. Yes. So while there was, this is part of my book and the trilogy I'm writing, but it's remarkable how much power the Constitution concentrates in the president, because the president is given the power to declare emergencies. As you well know, Trump is doing this every day. Yeah. He doesn't have the legal right to do tariffs or to send these troops to DC today and so forth, but he's declaring emergencies, which the Constitution has given him a power to do. So you can trace, Trump is doing some new things, but he's deep into the bloodstream of America. And it goes to go back to the issue of sociocide that we were talking about. These issues of social disconnection and have always been a really tenuous problem in America, building some kind of popular rule in America. It's tied to the fact that just like capital, economic and capital concentrates capital in such a small number of hands. 800 billionaires in the United States today have more wealth than 50% of the entire population. 8 people have more wealth than, probably, most of that population. So we have very concentrated economic capital, which is really the foundation of lack of democracy. Remember in German fascism and Italian fascism in the 30s, the workers were being economically, there was in a Great Depression, and we don't seem to have that kind of thing, but we do have a kind of depression going on. It's just not understood by people who run the country very well. So we have a crisis of economic capital, and it's overlaid now by this crisis of social capital, meaning, the economic problems that everyday people are experiencing are overlaid and intertwined with these relational problems of a breakdown of sense of meaningful connection. People like, I know, can I eat with these people every day? Do I have safety in my marriage or in my friendships with people, in my workplace? And the answer is, at least, you may have seen this, a guy named Vivek Murthy, who was Biden's Surgeon General. His most 2024 report was called The Epidemic of Loneliness in America. And he just documented a huge amount of information on people's friendships, how they eat, do they eat together or alone, how many people live alone, how many people get married, stay married, and so forth. And I use in this book, I just pick up some of that information and sort of talk about what its meaning is for the society, to have a society where sort of the bonds that hold a society together are sort of breaking down. I don't know if we might have talked about it at one point, Jason, there's a society in Africa, in Uganda. It was displaced by the government. It was called the IK.
Talked about it in the book in the beginning.
Yes, in the Wilding of America, like we probably talked about. It was a tribe that was sent by the government there, and there wasn't much food. And an anthropologist went and wrote a book about them called The Mountain People. And he called them the loveless people. And what he found was that these people couldn't have any feelings, and they couldn't care for them. So if you and I were there and we were brothers, Jason, and you were sick, and I wanted to go out and get you food, I would die because there was so little food that if I put any emotional energy into trying to save you and help you, I needed to sort of, in order to survive in that society, once they were displaced into this barren land, you had to 100% focus on finding food to stay alive. You were on the edge of starvation. And so you had to think entirely of yourself. If I said, I love Jason, I want to do something for Jason, I could probably not survive that day because I had to sort of focus all my energy. So we're not in that kind of starvation, but I'm arguing in the book that one, America has long had this kind of sort of, we're all out for ourselves, competing for food. I notice my students are running on the rat race to get as much money as they can in Wall Street or wherever they're going to go. And it's the same kind of feeling. People feel that if they try to care for other people, I don't want to generalize too much, as you say, there's a lot of people like us who are really invested in their building relations with other people. But there is this structural foundation in our economic system, which just pits us against each other in competition for survival. And it makes caring and connecting with other people very difficult. So you've got these Trump supporters who are kind of on the edge. Most of them are saying they're living paycheck by paycheck. They feel if they lose a job, if they get sick, they're going to sink into abject poverty and not recover. And what they're finding in Trump, beyond the belief that he was going to make the economy better, which of course he's not.
No.
He's making it worse for them because he's putting all their money into the billionaires that he's buddies with. But he is offering what fascists offer, which says, look, you've got these problems, you've got these enemies, and I'm going to be a tough guy. I'm going to kill your enemies. I'm going to mobilize all the power of our military and our police state to go after your enemies. And all you have to do is trust me. And you have to simply sort of believe in me. I will tell you the truth. There is no other truth. Fascism is also a system of not only concentrating power, but truth in one person. And so Trump, when he fires the the secretary, the guy who connects data statistics for the Labor Department, he's just saying, you've got to believe me about what's happening with jobs right now in America. And if he's firing, people who are teaching, Black history or teaching about climate change or teaching about authoritarianism, those people are afraid. Fascism breeds fear. And if you're in a sociocidal context, the fear that, people like Trump, fascist leaders, try to stoke is already there. There's kind of a natural resonance between the way fascism works, which is preying on the fear of disconnected people who are struggling for both economic and social capital, and the aims of a fascist leader, which are to basically subject people entirely. It's very much in a way like a cult. Why do people go to a cult and then kill themselves? I mean, people have to concentrate so much loyalty and belief in this leader. Why do people do that? Because I mean, there are many different reasons, I suppose, but they're afraid, and they're very afraid of enemies that, you know, fascist leaders have really made. You remember, I don't know, in 1984, the classic book by George Orwell. Um, he every day people were the public assembled before what he called in public squares, public workplaces, so forth, what he called telescreens, which were like big video screens. And it was do you remember the 3-minute hate? And the 3-minute hate was it would on the video you would see these, you know, people of different races, and they were all portrayed as after your, you know, your mother, your wife, or your daughter, and, you know, they were seen as the enemy. And in the book, you know, the whole public was worked into a state of incredible fear and hate, screaming at the enemy on the telescreen, you know, and this was the 3-minute hate. That's kind of what Trump is doing, right? He's got 3-minute hate videos sort of every day. He's on, you know, Truth Social or Fox News, wherever he is, and he is generating this hate and fear among people who are sociocidally vulnerable. I mean, they're sort of vulnerable to feeling they can't survive. And the only thing that will help them survive is surrendering everything to this guy. And that will make them safe. And he will bond them together with other in a really safe community. So, because everybody, you know, we're wired to be social people. So if you're, you know, that's my belief. I believe that, you know, people who are disconnected are not living up to sort of the way we're sort of biologically wired to be. And fascism preys on this vulnerability that people experience when this is what Hannah Arendt was saying, it was what, you know, de Tocqueville is saying. And I think it's pretty clear. I mean, I was so struck by how, you know, disconnected Trump followers were, you know, reporting they were eating all their meals alone, that they did not have, you know, strong friendships and so forth. And when it was the one time that they felt this connection was when they went to Trump rallies. And that's why these Trump rallies, I think, were so powerful, that it was the one source of community that so many of these people actually experienced. So, you know, to me, what that says is we need to deal with the economic crisis of capital, as I'm sure you talk about in your show all the time. But at the same time, when you're dealing with fascism, I mean, the economic crisis is very real. Of course, in Germany in the 30s, it was a much more serious economic crisis, although Trump may create this deliberately.
I mean, we're getting there. I mean, there's more people like myself.
I expect it, yeah.
But
we have to, just the only one thing I just want to add is that, so we have to deal with the crisis of social capital at the same time. They're intertwined, economic and social capital. People's fear of losing, you know, the safety of relationships and trusting other people and so forth. We're in a society where about 60% now say people feel we're moving toward a city where everybody feels they need a gun to survive, not general violence, but political violence, you know, feeling that we're moving toward a civil war. The society is so polarized, so divided, so much hate, you know, among different groups in the society. And Trump is he preys on this feeling. But
would you say though, and look, there's nothing you said that I disagree with. Maybe I want to add something to expand it a little bit. It feels like to me we're living in a post-truth moment,
right,
where everyone can have their own individual truth, right? That's a common saying nowadays. My truth. I just have to live my truth. And in that, I think it is mixed in with the way people see the world. So you said earlier that you have a lot of students that don't trust the media. They don't know who is a quote unquote influencer and who's real.
Right.
So everyone can kind of live in their own world of truth and righteousness. And what leftism ends up looking like for a lot of people is kind of moral causes. And I think that could be problematic because in reading your book, I was also writing something about, as you can see, science fiction and how it pertains to the current moment outside of that introduction. And one of my conclusion was, I don't know if the Trump administration will bring in Trump-like fascism, because I believe that because Trump doesn't have a true ideology politically, he'll constantly shoot himself in the foot. And I'll use this as an example. In 2016, when he gets in the office, right, there's only murderers and rapists coming from south of the border. I alone can save you from the murderers and rapists.
Right.
And then we get child separation, which is horrible for his presidency, which actually leads to a huge political backlash that causes sanctuary cities, right?
Right.
They can't figure out how to beat these sanctuary cities while he's in office. But during the Biden administration, a few governors start sending large swaths of people to California, New York, and Chicago. Maybe Chicago gets it the worst. Their population explodes with migrants, causing all kinds of inner city turmoil. And this idea that these bad people are taking your funds because these Democratic elected officials want open borders and they give them all the resources, and that wasn't true.
Right.
But I say all that to say that it's backfiring again, because as people, he campaigned once again on these brown people coming from south of the border.
Right.
They're bad hombres.
Right.
But maybe worse than child separation, seeing mothers separated from their children and fathers. And another thing about the Trump base is a lot of them are small business people that rely on these people as laborers.
So
you're taking not just redundant labor, but you're also taking kind of middle management that handles a lot of the redundant labor. So he's hurting his own base once again. To me, every time we see, in my memory, I'm 48. I'll be 48 in 2 weeks. After 12 years of Reagan and Bush Sr., you get Bill Clinton, which is just rhetorically a nicer version of Reagan. But we get things like the '94 crime bill. We get welfare reform. We get Hope 6. We get all these horrible things that we would equate with these quote unquote fascist leaders. But it's done systematically. It's done with a smile. If you recall, in '94, there were so many what we would call leftist black leaders that were on board with longer prison sentences for younger people. I feel that what you're going to get out of the Democratic Party, and we're starting to see this slowly, is going to be the Democratic fascism, which is going to be nicer. It's going to be extremely inclusive. It'll be brown. It'll be female. It'll be non-binary. It'll be all the things. But that's what scares me, is the response is always going to be, we'll be tougher on crime, but we're going to be smart about it. We're not going to snatch up people at work for a parade. We're going to do it the way no one sees it, like it's been happening. It was happening under Obama. It was happening under Biden. Do you ever feel that way about what happens in the wake of this?
Well, I agree with you. And, parts of this book, Bonfire, on sociocide, does really indict the Democratic Party.
You do.
Because for exactly the reasons you say, that it didn't really deal with the structural foundation. Democrats are a corporate party. They're a super militaristic party. People, Americans want American money to come into helping themselves, helping people at home. They see the Democratic Party as, just going all out into, Biden was just a horror in terms of both Gaza and in terms of, Ukraine. These are wars that should not have been fought and should have been a militant, and the Democrats sold them out. And the Democrats are also, of course, deeply in bed with their corporate funders. So yes, the Democrats have a large responsibility. But in terms of whether Trump will be stopped, Trump is, working in a long legacy of American authoritarianism, and he's not entirely new, but he's doing something different even than Reagan did, although Reagan was so horrible in so many ways. And the thing, you're right that Trump doesn't have a coherent ideology and seems like a clown, and not like somebody that's going to be able to sort of pursue any kind of coherent, powerful ideology. But the one thing you left out of that I would just add, Jason, is that what's different in the second term, Trump isn't smarter. So why is his second term so much more dangerous authoritarian-wise? He's got the Heritage Foundation, J.D. Vance, a good deal of the corporate billionaires in Silicon Valley who used to vote Democratic and are now sort of seeing opportunities with Trump. He's got a very, very well prepared. I'm thinking of the people at the 2025 Project and the other people. I don't care what Trump is thinking. He's got a bunch of people who have scripted exactly what has to be done at the Justice Department, at the Defense Department, with, labor data. I mean, Trump isn't smart enough to do this stuff, or, focused enough to do it. I agree with you. I don't think he has any coherent ideology. And I think that this time, he's got some smart, right-wing, very well-prepared people behind him. And these people, I don't mean his cabinet because they're pretty crazy. I don't mean the X-Men.
No Christy Nome, huh?
Yeah. No, I'm talking about, the people from the right wing, the people like in the Federalist Society, the people in the, Project 2025 people. These are smart people, and they've been working for years on trying to get in this kind of. So that's what I'm worried about. And I'm afraid that Trump is, I see him, I'm like you, I think, is it really possible that this guy, despite all the conditions I'm describing in the book, where economic capital and social capital are so aligned with authoritarianism, is this really the guy that can take us over the line that way and do this kind of damage? And I don't think we really know yet, but he does have a really, really smart group of people on the right who are doing a lot of this policy. I don't think Trump.
But in this policy that's getting done, most of this is executive order.
Yes.
Because these are not favorable policies.
Right.
And even though we can all agree that he did run on extreme racism,
right,
in practice, it has never paid off for him. This is the anniversary of Heather Heyer getting killed in I can't remember the name of the protest there, where they said that Jews will not replace us, was it 2017? And Trump says, very nice people on both sides.
Right.
Really, again, these are the things that hurt his presidency so much, because so many people started to move away, and then the whole COVID thing.
Jason, it doesn't matter, because he's now playing with he's using the Constitution and a lot of the laws that enable a president to basically rig elections. I mean, even if his numbers are, right now his numbers are down in the 30s, the high 30s. Yeah. The Democrat Party's numbers are down in the high 20s. But what he's doing, declaring emergency, is running rampant with more very familiar electoral schemes that are going to, the gerrymandering, the not counting ballots, the intimidation of people at election officials. 1/3 of the country's election officials say they are getting death threats and are afraid to count ballots. They're going after the voting ballots. So, in a way, it doesn't quite matter what, I don't anticipate that in 2026 there will be any kind of, I think there will be elections, but there are elections in Hungary with Orban, there are elections in Russia with Putin. The elections don't mean much. And I'm worried that there's enough concerted planning with the red states and with the Republicans right now that even if Trump's numbers keep going down, and you're right, they are going down, and I expect economic situation to make this worse, the Constitution gives him enough emergency power. I've been really struck by this as I've been studying the Constitution and our laws and fashion. You put together the amount of money that Citizens United and all the dark money that's now possible in the the Citizens United post-Constitution, and put that money together with what the Constitution enables the president in terms of emergency declarations. And it's really scary. Trump is very good at this. He has been declaring economic emergencies, public health emergencies, immigrant invasion emergencies, and he does it as a way to, send more police, federalize
More
more
troops.
police. And
Yeah.
send them. This is the way. I mean, that's what Hitler did. He declared emergency. So in a way, it doesn't much matter how popular he is in terms of whether this is really going to be a foundation, whether does his unpopularity translate into a real change in power. And I don't think we know yet, but I don't think at all. I think he could be very low in the polls and still pull out congressional elections because of the way they're structuring, both fear. People are afraid. Almost everybody administering elections is afraid. Even the Republicans, a lot of the Republicans who believe in globalization and all the bad stuff that was going on before, outsourcing jobs, they're scared. I mean, most Republicans are saying they're getting death threats to their families or pizzas sent to their homes.
Well, has he officially done the ultimate big bad? Because, and I hate to get into kind of the drama of the day.
Mm-hmm.
I've never done a show on Epstein, nor will I. But I do think it's interesting how adding this new loophole to be like, we're going to 14-year-olds are adults now. And everybody's first thing is, well, now you can screw them. It's like, well, before you go to that, now they can work.
Yeah.
Which is really frightening. Like, we fought for those labor rights to not have children work for a reason.
Right.
There's no machines that need little fingers anymore in 2025.
Right.
A lot of this has to do with like low birth rates, younger people not, opting out of family. To your point about the socioside, right? It's happening in real time.
At any kind of secure job, they don't see a future. They can't afford a house or renting there. But one thing I would take a little bit of issue with you, Jason, is you said everybody has their own truth. Mm-hmm. Well, the way fascism works is that the leader comes to monopolize all the information that's called truth. And Trump is working very hard at that. He's getting rid of all the bases of knowledge, whether it's data collection of the economy or whether it's information about, health concerns with COVID or bird flu, or whether it's the number of immigrants coming across the border and so forth. And, this is at the heart of fascism. It's not that everybody has their own truth. It's that the leader has the truth. And whether Trump will succeed in, he's collecting Palantir and these data archiving systems that, that's being created in Silicon Valley. They're taking data on everybody. They're recording what you and I are talking about right now. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a paranoid person. I just know that this collection is going on. And they're creating the infrastructure that fascist states depend on to round up and silence people who are influencing the way people think about the world. And so it's true right now, we can say these words and we're not about to be arrested. But whether that will be the case 6 months from now or a year from now, we don't know. And
well, there are words that literally we cannot say on these streaming platforms. I have gotten the reason why my introduction, there's like pixelated images that I've been playing this introduction for 5 years, is because YouTube started pulling the streams down. Right. And it took me a couple weeks, and finally someone got back to me. I doubt it was a person. And they said, well, you can't no longer have images of anyone holding a firearm. And in the introduction, there's this big Russian or Soviet parade.
Right.
Whatever, it's for 10 seconds. But and then we have like some Kurdish women holding guns.
Mm-hmm. I like the intro. I loved watching it. Yeah, it was great.
But it's a no-no now. And we did a show with a gentleman that wrote a really interesting article. Bornir Radnick is his name, about the TV show Andor and Huey Newton's idea or theory of revolutionary suicide. And because I said that word in the show, the stream got pulled down.
Right. Wow.
So there is extreme
censorship. That's what I mean, Jason. That while Trump seems like a clown and incoherent, doesn't have a coherent ideology, doesn't seem like a person who could pull off a fascist revolution. I mean, we're seeing evidence, and what you're describing is one part of that evidence that people. I mean, I'm on an East Coast thing. There are 120 universities in Boston. I know a lot of people in universities, students, faculty. they are all afraid. Their courses are being monitored. But, I mean, people are facing kinds of scrutiny that is making people unable to say, just like you are, unable to say things that they've always assumed they could. People are having their course curricula, the books I use. I never would have imagined that those could get under any kind of administrative surveillance but we know now that these things are in play. And, the people at Project 2025, if they've got this all worked out, they've got the list of names, they know exactly how to archive this data and collect it. And so I think even though Trump is, kind of aging and is, not coherent, and I agree, does not have a coherent ideology at all, you don't need any in order. I mean, Hitler did not have a coherent ideology. I mean, he was a good demagogue. He was playing on a lot of economic desperation. But the Weimar Republic, in a way, the part of the sort of regime in Germany before Hitler in the 1920s was a more democratic system than what we have had in the United States, which is for a long time. As you were saying, we've had an imperial president since Reagan, since Bush, and 9/11 has all played into more authoritarianism.
That's another thing people don't talk about enough is, Bush using these war powers.
Absolutely. I have a big section in the book on Iran, on Bush using 9/11 the Patriot Act was a perfect example of, sort of a fascist thing. It never got fully activated by Bush, but it's been around and, it's being translated into these emergency actions. So things like the Patriot Act under Bush were really significant. They laid the foundation for, and like I said, you can go all the way back in American history. During World War I, you probably know this, Jason, Woodrow Wilson was going after all kinds of, like he jailed Eugene Debs, he was the anti-World War I leading socialist and labor organizer. And that was for just speaking up against the draft. I mean, that was a period, we're talking about 1917, 1918, where the president was able to use emergency war measures to basically, silence dissent, to throw into jail prominent people or people like you or me talking on, some sort of public broadcast and throw them in jail. So there is this history that's why I worry about Trump. This is not new stuff entirely. It goes deep into the blood of American history. And I realize that Trump is an incompetent fool, but he plays the fascist game. Hitler played the fascist game well. He was not coherent ideologically. But he used war to rebuild Germany. And, he got Henry Ford, a militant America First fascist, to basically rebuild the Autobahn and, the auto industry as he remilitarized Germany. And I can see Trump increasingly doing that. He poured $1 trillion into the military. The military is being built up to basically provide more emergency powers, more enemies. I mean, fascist regimes almost always rely on military threats as, it's the enemy at home. It's the black and brown enemy at home, but it's also the black and brown enemy abroad, and so we have a Cold War history. We just have so much. And, like I say, the Constitution, if you go back, I've done a lot of study as I'm writing this trilogy on American authoritarianism on how poorly understood the Constitution is and the legal framework in America in terms of actually what it's designed to do. And it really is designed in a way to maintain both presidential power and oligarchic power. And that's what's threatening. It's not hard for an incompetent like Trump to use what's there in terms of the legal framework of the country, even if it's not popular, to use the powers he has available to him to, shut things down and to move toward a more clear form of American fascism. But there's a long history of this kind. I do feel, if we go back to what I'm trying to put in this book on BONFIRE, that one of the encouraging thing is that, within 3 months of Hitler, there was no resistance. Hitler had basically taken over the media entirely. There would have been no Jason. There would have been no Charlie Derber. There would have been only, he came in January 33, Hitler. In March, he had created the Ministry of Propaganda and National Enlightenment. And he dictated every word that was, put out in the news. Trump is trying to move in that direction, but not nearly as successfully. But, he's got a very powerful group of people behind him. And increasingly, the Peter Thiels of the world, the sort of billionaire class is seeing the possible, benefits. I mean, these guys all have multi-trillion-dollar contracts with the government. They're increasingly tied. Silicon Valley is becoming integrally related with the national security state. These guys, whether it's Musk or Peter Thiel or any of these billionaires in Silicon Valley who used to sort of be libertarian, or they're now part of the national security state. They are the data collectors on you and me. They are basically getting, amazingly large contracts from, the military, from the CIA, from, NASA to, so we're seeing conditions that are ripe for a kind of fascist takeover, and I don't think we're just going there now. We're well into the process, I mean, it could go a lot further because we're having this conversation. We're not being shut down right now, but I think we're moving very, very fast in that direction.
It feels that way.
I just want to say the hope, because I'm emphasizing here people's personal relations. The reason I think people might like this book called BONFIRE is that it does deal a lot with very personal things about your relations with your friends, with your classmates, with your workmates, with your wife, with the people you eat with. And it shows that these relationships are really important in your politics. I mean, in a way, the feminist movement sort of showed in the late 60s, early 70s that politics begins at home, in the bedroom, in the kitchen, and so forth. And what I'm trying to show here is that in this book on American sociocide, that fascism also begins at home. It starts in the relations, but people have with their family. The famous Frankfurt School, which studied fascism, they looked at the family in Germany, and they looked at the nature of authority and how it was exercised by parents, fathers, mothers, and so forth. And there's just a really interesting literature about how German fascism grew out of, existing forms of relationships, which had a pretty authoritarian character in the time of not the Nazi era. And so what I've tried to do in this book is say, look, we need to create a structural revolution against the economic system because it's just out of control. We've got the tiniest class of billionaire oligarchs who are destroying the whole economy and country, ripping it off, taking all the money. We're getting more redistribution of wealth up to the billionaire class than has ever happened in American history. But the resistance is, there's still enough that, millions of people are coming out on the streets and are building relations. Trump built, his community in his rallies. Well, what's good about these protests going on today is that, people are building relationships as they create these protests, which are ongoing all over the country, whether they're, to protect workers who are being fired from, healthcare, public health centers, or, to protect immigrants from all over the place from being deported, or, and that's a source of hope. And there is history in this book. I also talk about the history of resistance and how it builds in the the abolitionist movement, in the populists of the Gilded Age, in the in the 30s and the 60s that I was a part of during the anti-war and civil rights movement. Then you see that movements in America are capable of rebuilding social bonds, and that's what a movement really is. It's building up connections between people who feel. I mean, I talk about the oxygen of resistance. When you're isolated, sometimes people feel they can barely breathe. They're in so much fear or desperation. And what resistance does, it builds up the kinds of social connections and relationships that allow people to feel a little bit safer, to breathe a little bit more normally, to have their heart beat a little bit more slowly. And so a lot of this book, even though it's quite grim about what I see as the history and current prospects of fascism, it does talk about many reasons to feel that there's a way to fight back against this, both against the crises of economic capital and social capital, that we can really make a difference. So there's a lot of hope in this book, despite the, I try to be as truthful about the grimness of the situation as I can be truthful about.
Well, wherever you guys are watching or listening to this show, there's a link in the description to the Bonfire books. I almost said episode 1. Book number 1 is out now. Again, there's a link in the description. Do you have anything to say in closing, Dr. Derber?
No, just Jason, thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And maybe we can, anytime you want to reconnect, I have another version of this coming out in December. But thank you for the opportunity. I thank you for doing your show. And thanks for being you. I mean, it was great to talk to you.
The same goes out to you. Thank you for writing this book. It was actually a really interesting read. It's about 123 pages.
Yeah, it's not that long. And I think if you take a look, it's written very simply. So I hope you'll give it a good plug. And because I think many people who don't want to read these kinds of books will find it a very simple and kind of personal book to read about politics.
Well, Dr. Derber, thank you very much. And
thank you,
look
Jason.
forward to bringing you back on the show.
Thanks so much. Take good care of yourself. Look forward to talking to you in the future.
Same here. Take care.
Okay.
Dr. Charles Derber, sociocide. I was being very serious. I saw that Trump thing about DC. He was going to deploy the National Guard. And I had written this thing a few years ago. Ben Burgess helped me edit it. And I made some changes to it to add in kind of where we are now. With Trump wasn't even in office when I wrote it. He was out of office. And then also reading Professor Derber's book. The conclusion I came to at the end was a lot different than the original conclusion. It was a little more of a hopeful piece, but I did come to a conclusion at the end. I think the fascist face is going to look a little different. I think it's going to look a little bit more like Gavin Newsom. I think Kamala Harris is a Republican version of Donald Trump. I think she was incoherent. There was a bit of, and Dr. Derber writes about this in his book. There's a lot of interest around Kamala Harris when she had said she was going to run for office. I think people forgot she raised like $2 million, small money donations. There's a lot of interest, but the Dems had said a lot of things that were popular, that they thought were popular at the time in regards to identity politics. And I really feel like the thing that shot the Harris campaign in the foot, more than even some of the silence on Gaza for a while, was we're going to give trans prisoners sex changes. Like, you really believe the only people in America that are going to get socialized health care are convicted felons who happen to be transgender? I was in a bar here in Rosarito, and that ad came on during a football game. And my first response was, oh, shit. And somebody looks to me, because a few people know what I do. And the guy goes, is that serious? And I looked at the person. I was like, how many trans criminals do you think exist? And he goes, I never thought of that. I was like, exactly. And that ended the conversation. Just that. How many do you think? Let's just say she's serious. Let's just say she's got a checkbook out there and a whole box of dicks. She's got because she's going to chop them off. Or put some on. She's going to take the chopped off ones and put them on the people that need them. And then she's going to make hot dogs. She's going to split the hot dog down the middle of the other ones. That's what she's going to do. It's a whole agenda, and they have a plan for it. How many people do you think are going to, like, really? That's going to bankrupt the economy, even if it was true. And it was over. That ad did so much damage. Culture war stuff did so much damage. So much damage. And I can't remember when we live streamed the murdering of children and innocent people. It's being live streamed. People don't like it. You know what else is being live streamed? Kidnapping. You can't live stream kidnapping and the murder of innocent people. Doesn't work real well. People are pissed. Trumpers are pissed. Democrats are pissed. People are pissed. That's what scares me. And you know what people want when they're pissed? They want order. Give me order. Trump is too crazy. The Democrats want to take dicks and give dicks. It's a dick. Take. People are pissed. And it is that coherent speech that they're waiting for. And I think that coherent speech will be worse than 94. And I say that being a person that grew up in a very violent time in Richmond, California. It was scary. And the solution came from a Democrat. The guys that let the prisoners run free. And that message was, we have a problem. There's these bad apples and there's these lazy people. There's a defective society of poor people. And the solution is locking them up because drugs, crack, is the problem. I've said this on this show a gajillion times. Make it a gajillion and one. Why not? Drugs don't happen in a magical vacuum. There are material conditions that grow that industry so effing large. Number one, the end of industry in certain major urban areas like Los Angeles, like Detroit. The next big job that comes in becomes drugs. You already have a gang infrastructure that can distribute the drugs, so you have a built-in distribution base. Those guys are going to fight amongst each other for turf because turf is very valuable. Crack houses are very valuable. You're going to have some violence. It's not like they can call their congressman. It's not like they can tie up another gang in litigation. But that's where we are today because we've legalized all the bad stuff. I don't know if this made it better, but I do think that adds to the social disconnection. I do really believe that. Robert Booth says 94 Richmond, California was no joke. He ain't lying. I don't want to laugh about it because there's people that I know that aren't here anymore because of that. It was a scary time. And people panicked. You know what's not scary? Today. I'm not worried about drive-bys. I'm not worried about gangs. It's not because I'm a badass. They just don't exist in the same way they existed a long time ago. Who's a bigger dealer than Pfizer? No longer is the distribution center in the inner city. It's just everywhere. It's legal. So I'm worried about my car getting broken into because I'm poor and I have a high deductible just to barely have insurance. So if you bust out my window, you got me. Like I'm effed up. And there's nothing you're going to get out of my car. I don't have anything in it. You're going to get a janky ass auxiliary cable because my car is so old, I don't have Bluetooth. So if you broke into my car, it doesn't have Bluetooth to still the pesos. I don't even keep real American money. I have pesos in the ashtray to pay for the toll road and water. You're going to be really upset. You're just going to break it, and then you'll just be mad, and you'll probably do fucked up shit to my car, and then break out all the windows because you can't. I'm going to be mad about that. I'm going to be hella mad about that. But that's not locking you up for the rest of your life, mad. That's what a lot of people are dealing with. That kind of shit. God damn it, motherfucker stole my laptop. Well, was that your personal one or the one the job gave you? It's the one the job gave me. That's the one I searched all the porn on. I use different VPNs and they can't find me. Steve says Jason's got the cassette tape with the aux cord. Actually, there's just a little thing for an auxiliary cable, and it's only got a CD player. And the CD is stuck in it, so take that. Timothy says they're going to leave Jason money and a note saying, get it together. Damn. That would be messed up. But thank you guys. I'm going to be going to the champagne room with my good friend, the voice of reason on this show, M. Toussaint. We're going to continue to watch the videos that she chose for the 8-hour benefit that I want to thank you guys for so much. Did we raise our goal? No, not even close. But we're still here. It did help. It had to help quite a bit, actually. Someone says, which CD is stuck in it? You really want to know? It was a CD we went to Brazil with. We had made kind of a compilation of all these Bitter Lake songs and a few things that we weren't going to release. And that's what's stuck in there. I can't get it out. Can't get it. Yeah. That's what she said. But thank you guys very much. Come join me in the champagne room. If the link is already up, if you're a patron, if you're a paid YouTube subscriber, the link is already up. I look forward to seeing your lovely words and imagining what your faces look like. That sounded weird, but it's true. And on that note, again, wherever you're watching or listening to the show, there's a link in the description to Charles Derber's book. I say that 5 times fast. Say that 5 times fast, Chris Hedges. Just kidding. I'm going to get hate mail from Chris Hedges. Thank you, guys. We are out.